Hey folks, welcome back to another bonus episode. I thought I'd put this together really quickly. I love bringing in experts on stuff that I'm trying to learn or pick up or have stuff that y'all ought to know about. In this case, and I think I've been talking about this for a few weeks on the podcasts, but I decided I wanted to learn game dev. I've got a 17-year-old son that wants to be a game developer when he grows up, he's just so into it. And then I've got some neighbors and friends who, they're trying to up their Unity game, and I started looking at it and started getting inspired by it. And so, I've been talking about, hey, I'm going to start doing kind of a meetup or mastermind every week, just for whoever wants to come and talk building games with Unity. And the course I'm taking is a course by my friend Jason. And so I thought, you know what, let's get the expert on, talk a little bit about what it's like to build games, what it's like to learn how to build games, get some ideas around it. Now, Jason's already given me a discount code for his course. I'm not going to hard pitch it to you, but we'll give you the discount code. So if you want to take the course, you can. And then I think that's probably the best bet, because then you can follow along with me where I'm at. So anyway, Jason, do you want to just introduce yourself, let people know who you are? You've been around before, but I thought it'd be great just to let people know who you are and what you're doing, and then we can talk about game dev.
Sure. I think first I was just really excited that you've got a 17-year-old that now wants to get into game dev, which I think is the perfect time to dive into this stuff. So I think this is going to be a really fun conversation. But I've been doing game development, I think, probably since I was game development since I was 12, making my own little stuff on my Commodore 64 when I ran out of games. And then eventually, I found myself in professional programming, doing a little bit of software stuff at Intel, and then found and kind of stumbled into a game development job at Sony. Spent a very long time working on MMOs at Sony, and then did a long stint building mobile games and a whole VR company as well after that. Built a ton of games, and now I mostly just talk about game development on YouTube and kind of help others and teach other people how to build stuff. And I get to meet and see a lot of people who've built all kinds of really cool stuff. I actually have cards of a couple different developers that I ran into at GDC just a couple weeks ago who are all building out their own games, and a lot of them are students, or just one of them's this guy is new out of college, building with a bunch of college students. Another one of them had just built a game. He went through he started in high school, released it in college, and he's got thousands of overwhelmingly positive reviews on Steam, and it's a huge success. It's a lot of fun. It's definitely the thing I recommend if you're getting into software. I mean, so I think all coding and programming is fun, to be honest. I have fun with all of it, but game stuff I feel it's a lot more fun, because you get to see the excitement and the joy on people's faces, and there's a lot less of the anger and frustration. I've done a lot of enterprise development as well. I spent some time at Intel, quite a while at Qualcomm, and a couple other places doing more of the business stuff. And while it's interesting, you get to solve some fun, cool problems, nobody is ever really excited. Nobody is ever super excited that, hey, we got this KPI up from one level to another, or hey, we just added this new API that makes things a little bit easier, or supports this new phone or something. Some people are like, oh, that's cool. But when it's games, people are jumping up and down excited. Everybody is calling and sending you messages and emails and making posts about how fun it is and how excited they are about it. You don't get that in the business environment.
Right. Well, it's interesting for a couple of reasons. I mean, for me, part of it is stories, right? I love telling stories, right? I mean, heck, that's why I got into podcasting, really, is, I was listening to people tell their stories, and I kind of feel that, and I live it, and I don't know how to describe exactly what it is, but there's something about stories that just light me up. And so then it's, okay, well, now I can create a story, right? I can take somebody on a journey. And, for a long time, it really felt like, okay, well, I'd go play like a StarCraft, or, I'd go play one of the first-person shooters, or I'd go play one of the MMORPGs, one of the big ones. And, it's like, how do I create this wide world of things? And it felt so overwhelming. And then it seems like over probably the last 10 years, and especially over the last maybe 4 or 5 years, it seems like people have really been able to build their own indie games, and through Steam or other places, they're able to create these just really interesting, fascinating ways that you can explore a world. And whether it's something like a tower defense game, right, where you're really not, the story's kind of outside of the gameplay, or whether people are like moving through a level and experiencing something there. It's just been really interesting to see. And it's like, okay, well, and we've interviewed some of them on some of our podcasts, and I'm going, the people we're interviewing, and this isn't to be offensive, but it's not like they're wildly talented, and so they can do what these giant companies did. It's that the tooling and the availability of a lot of this stuff has just come to the place where you can create a terrific immersive game, with a handful of people. And yeah, if you want to get more expansive, you probably need more people just to get all of that work done. But you can create a solid indie game these days on your own.
Yeah, it's totally changed. I think of when I wanted to get into game development back in the 1900s, and was looking at the Torque game engine and Unreal. You could use a little bit of the tooling, but most of the options, yeah. Most of the options required $1 million investment up front and like an actual plan, a big thing to do. So it was very, very difficult to get into. And then I think you kind of nailed it. About 10 years ago or so, Unreal and Unity really started to compete. It was shortly after, I think, what happened with iOS. So the iPhone came out. Unity was the first one to support it by, I think, almost 2 years ahead of just about every other game engine, and they were really quick to it too. So it got a huge adoption and became super popular. And because there was a free version available, it made it so that they were getting even more and more popular. Then Unreal realized what was going on, that they weren't getting the developers trained up as fast, and a lot of them were switching to the competitor because in college you could just jump over and actually use this engine for free. You didn't need to have this thing, and they switched over to like a $5. I think they had like a $10 a month, then a $5 a month, and then switched to free as well. So now everybody has a free version of their game engine that you can use to pretty much build the entire game. The special things in the upgraded versions, there are a couple unique scenarios where you would want to use or need some of the things in there. But for most indie developers, it's really just about the licensing, and once you hit certain revenue amounts, you've got to pay for some license. And Unreal and Unity are both pretty much the same. They just deal with it differently. One is a flat fee and one is a revenue share. But yeah, it's gotten so easy, and the information available is vast too. There used to be one or two books at the local bookstore or maybe at the faraway bookstore that you could get a hold of. They would teach you a little bit about programming a specific type of thing and maybe using a little bit of a game engine. And now there's unlimited resources on just about anything that you want. There's ridiculous numbers of videos, courses, and even AI stuff. I've been using AI to teach in my latest coursework stuff, just showing that you can use it to find out how to do all of the things that you can't find anywhere else or that you're having a hard time with. You just run the questions through there and get the answers a lot of the time. So it's gotten, I'd say, 1,000 times easier, and there's really no reason not to build a game. If that's something that you want to do and you want to invest the time in, there's no reason that you can't do it.
Right. Makes total sense. So one question that I have, and I think you're aware of this, is that I haven't done very much C# programming, and I know that C# is kind of the lingua franca of Unity, right? But at the same time, it seems like Unity is probably the most popular, most capable, most resources out there for game developers, to build the kinds of games that I'm looking at building, right? And so we've had Amir Rajan come on Ruby Rogues and talk about Ruby Motion, and you can build some of the kinds of games that I'm looking at, but not all of them. And then the other one, on JavaScript Jabber, we had somebody come on and talk about building like in-browser games with Phaser. But again, it's limited to a lot of those things. You don't have all of the tools and engines and stuff that you get with Unity. So my question is do I have to be a C# expert in order to build in Unity, or is it kind of like when I picked up Ruby on Rails, where I kind of picked up the Rails way of building stuff and then learned the rest of Ruby later?
It is a lot more like the second thing, I'd say. You do, if you have an understanding of programming and JavaScript, it's going to be brain dead simple. It's like
Okay.
writing simple code to do most things until you get to like the very big, more complex problems that you probably won't run into until after you've released your first game. It's relatively simple C#. You can, of course, if you're better at C# and you can write better code, you'll be faster and you'll write more efficient things that are easier to deal with and manage. But overall, I mean, at the core of Unity, you're writing scripts that are C#, that are components that are getting added to game objects. So you've got this hierarchy of objects. You're adding these components to it that are just simple scripts that have built-in callbacks that get fired off when the object, like for instance, when the level loads and the object becomes alive, or once per frame, so that you can do things in a normal like game state way. You have an update loop where you can do things like move your object around, or whatever types of data manipulation that you want to do. Generally, though, you're dealing with things like that update loop, the start event that's getting fired off when your object is created, or you'll get a callback and a method that will get called automatically when something does something like a collision. So if you want to know like how to deal with a bullet hitting a block, you add an on collision enter method. It's automatically called, and you'll find all this stuff in the tooling and in the documentation.
Nice.
It's automatically called, tells you what object hit it, tells you what the direction and angle it hit it was, where the point is. Those are all just parameters passed in, and then you just decide what to do, like tell a particle system to play by calling .play, or destroy the object by calling destroy and passing in your object. It's relatively simple stuff. It's largely about hooking up the logic and thinking through all of the things going on at once. The one main difference that I think makes game development a little bit harder is that you're thinking of all of these objects moving kind of at once, and it can get a little bit complicated when you have more and more things. You got lots of enemies, lots of players, and all these systems all processing. It can get a little bit confusing versus a standard like a web workflow where you'll have a request come in, some things go out, you get your data back, and then you kind of present it, or an enterprise one where you're doing something similar. So there's a little bit more to deal with going on at once, but when you're starting out, it's however many things you set up to run at once. So it's not really that complicated until you build it up to something that's more complicated.
Right. So it sounds like it's mostly event driven.
Very much so. It's event driven and update loop driven. So there's a main update loop that's called every single frame where you can do things. And there are actually a couple different parts of that update loop that you can call in at. There's one for physics, there's one for the beginning of the frame, one for like the end of the frame. But in that update loop, you can do whatever types of things that you would do that aren't event driven. So if you have something that's not reacting to something else, but maybe it's reading input, you might read input in the update method and then apply some movement in there. There are lots of different things that you could do there, but I don't want to go into a real complicated scenario.
No, it's fine. I mean, what you're describing is not that different from what you get from like Node.js, right? I mean, they have an event loop that processes, triggered events, but it'll also do other events, on its own loop. And so it's not outside the realm of what people are kind of understanding if they work in a system that, runs on those kinds of events. But yeah. So what do I need to do to get started? Like if I decide, I've got this game idea, right? I've got this awesome idea where I'm going to, make my little dude, go on a journey from the Shire to Mount Doom or something. I don't know. How do I start putting this together?
Well, I think the first step is to just get the game engine installed. And I, again, still recommend Unity. Unreal is a great option, but I think it's a little bit easier to get started and learn Unity, especially for enterprise and web developers, because C# is just a direct allegory almost, and you don't have to dive into visual scripting or anything else. It's really easy to get into. But I would recommend, before diving into that dream game, of course, I always tell people, build like 3 to 5 small things. It doesn't have to be something huge. Like it can be Flappy Bird that you can run through a course and learn how to build in an hour, but go through and build at least a few different things and kind of get exposed to the different parts of the editor and some of the different capabilities while you're building something that you don't care too much about, that you can kind of run through, experiment with, and then go on to the next thing, and then run through, experiment with. And then once you've got comfortable in the editor where you're not like fumbling around going, where is all this stuff? Where are the things that I need? Then maybe consider building something a little bit bigger. But I think that after 3 to 5 small projects, you get an idea of where you're at and what you're capable of, and you can kind of just keep building that up. And these don't have to take a long time. That's the thing. Like, I don't think that you need to spend a year building up a bunch of little projects before you start building your thing. But spend a couple weeks, at least a few weeks each on each thing, and maybe a couple months total, building out some different things and trying out different stuff while you're coming up with the idea and planning out your big thing. Maybe you can work on your big thing a little bit on the side, but it's a lot easier to make progress and learn if you're starting new projects and trying out different things and then making sure that you're not getting stuck on some big concept and big idea, at least at first. And then I think it's good to dive in once you've got that experience and start building out the thing that you really want to make and think is going to be awesome.
Yeah, I think that's been my experience with a lot of other technologies, right? Where you get in and kind of the initial simple stuff kind of just works, right? You might run into a minor problem here, a minor problem there, and you kind of learn how things sit and then how they interact. But yeah, then you start bringing in bigger ideas. And so, yeah, it makes sense that you would work through a couple of different kinds of applications, or in this case, games, right? To say, okay, I understand now how this part of physics works, or this part of whatever, this part of animation, this part of, movement, or you talked about collisions, right? And so, okay, now that I kind of have a feel for how this goes, right, then I can start building out the more complex setup, because the underlying pieces are now things that I know how to deal with.
Yeah, you've got to get that, I think, the base understanding, and it doesn't have to take very long. It's a relatively quick process, I think, to build stuff out. And the best part is that there are tons of examples out there already. You don't have to come up with and be creative. And that's one of the core things I think is important when you're doing this learning part. When you're building out these projects, replicate something that already exists, that you already know is fun. Don't try to come up with and design and create something new that's fun, because then you're spending a lot of your brain power and energy on the designing and coming up with the fun part. And a lot of that time is built around that, instead of just the, how do I actually accomplish this specific task? If I want to recreate this exact game, keep it a game. I'd start with a game that has one mechanic, then go up to one that maybe has 2 mechanics, then go up to 3. Don't start with Clash of Clans, start with something super simple. And then you just copy it and build up, and then copy the next one and build up. You also have a very easy done point. So you can just mark it off and be like, okay, I copied it. It's finished. I can now move on. You don't have to go like, oh, it could be a little bit better. Oh, it could be more fun, which is what happens when you start designing your own thing. You get into that mindset of like, oh, I could just add one more thing and one more thing. But if you're just copying something, it's easy to go, okay, that was a fun copy. Let's move on to the next one. Right.
Now, the course that I've only barely started, like I installed Unity and I just barely kind of started poking it, just because I was sick last week, and I think I picked it up the week before. But I was kind of browsing through the course, and it looks like you walk somebody through actually building a game, right? And so it looks like this advice kind of holds, except I've got your videos and tutorials and stuff like that to kind of hold my hand through a lot of it.
Yeah. This is a very guided process of kind of getting through all of the steps of building a game, because it's easy to find, I think, a lot of tutorials on building a small game out there. There's tons of those for building something like Flappy Bird. I think I've done that like 5 or 6 times as a tutorial video.
Right.
But when it comes to building bigger stuff, there's not a lot, and there's a lot that kind of goes into it. So in this course, it's focused on building a 2D platformer, where you start off with relatively simple setup and simple graphics, using some of the older systems to show that they exist, and kind of how things are used in a lot of the tutorials that you see, and then showing how we use it or do things in a lot of the newer systems. So quickly go up to the latest versions of for instance, like the input system has totally been replaced. But if you jump into Unity right now, the default is still the old one. So a lot
Right.
of the things that you'll find are on the old one. So dive into how to use the new one, how to get into multiplayer setups and multiplayer that use things like the PlayStation controllers and Xbox controllers. It's actually not too difficult. It's a relatively simple setup if you know where all of these things exist. So yeah, in the course, we go through all of the fundamentals of building a multiplayer platformer, including building bosses, AI battles, some cutscenes,
Oh, nice.
level saving, transitions, and all of that kind of stuff, along with a couple things that were requested from students that have been added in there as well. There's a lot there, but at the end of it, you should have a really strong understanding of how to build at least a 2D platformer game. We don't dive into 3D in that one, but the switch to 3D is extremely simple. You just switch the camera mode. Literally, you switch the camera mode and start using 3D models instead of 2D stuff. It's very, very easy. There's there's pretty much no code difference. Well, you have to remove the 2D from some method calls. Use on collision enter instead of on collision enter 2D. So, but overall, it's very easy, and I find that it's a little bit easier to teach people in 2D because they can come up with cool, fun puzzles in 2D, and there's a lot of opportunity for that. It's easier to make a fun 2D thing out of a platform than it is out of a 3D game. So it gives them a good opportunity to play with designing levels and creating stuff and adding in their own bosses as well.
Yeah, my son, so his games, the games that he wants to kind of replicate and tell his own stories on, it's like Undertale, stuff like that, right? So he's gotten way into those, and he actually wants to replicate kind of the style and mystique of kind of the pixelated 2D artwork and stuff like that, right? And so and he's like drawing it out how he wants it and stuff. And so yeah, I mean that's definitely a place to start. And I think it's kind of funny too, because I remember when I was a kid, that was all we really had, right? Was, it might have been side scroll, or it might have been, kind of moving around a larger world like Legend of Zelda. But, at the end of the day, it was, that's kind of what we had. And so when we had the 3D, moving through space with your person, right? It was like, wow, these games are so realistic, right? And I think it's interesting that some of these games have gone back to that older style, and a lot of these kids really get into them. And so, yeah, it seems like kind of the sky's the limit, depending on what style you want to go for and where you want to go at. And so, yeah, I think 2D is a great place to start, and then kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think a lot of people have just huge success just making 2D games too.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, you don't need to have a giant art team and a bunch of 3D modelers and level designers making something huge and crazy to have a big successful game. You can build something that's relatively small, again, in 2D or 3D, and it's very easy to also combine and mix and match them. A lot of the time you'll see games that look 2D, they're actually kind of built in 3D, but they're just showing a 2D object floating around in 3D space, which is, again, a really simple thing to do. Just the camera option. You switch the camera mode and you're done.
Right. Yeah, it also seems like, because, again, I'm going to go back to StarCraft just because I've played a zillion hours of it, right? I mean, it's functionally a 2D game, right? I guess you have flying units, but they still move on a 2D map, you know, and then there are rules about what can shoot what and stuff like that. But a lot of the animation looks 3D, right? And so it seems like you can mix and match a lot of it.
Yeah, and you can fake a lot of that too, especially with like the older games. They would fake that a lot for performance. They would make it look 3D when it was completely 2D.
2D,
just just because it was so much faster.
Yeah.
Now
the
it's
animation.
Also, it's very easy to get into 3D stuff too. So anybody who's interested in like, oh, I really want to do 3D things, it's not difficult to switch at all. I mean, when I say it's not difficult, I mean it's not at all. One of the courses that I have actually goes like from a simple 2D project right into multiple different 3D projects and teaches how to do that, because it's that easy to build like a hack and slash style game or a first person shooter. There's really not a lot to it. There's the difference is, I don't even know that I would say it's harder. I'd say that it's almost easier to build something like a first-person shooter. It's just harder to build one that's fun. Right? It's harder to make it fun and interesting. That's kind of the more difficult.
Yeah.
But the core of building out a first-person shooter is relatively simple compared to even building out a fun 2D platformer.
Right. Well, it's that piece of it strikes me a little bit like the game balance that I find with board games, and I play a ton of board games. People who listen to the podcast are like, "Yeah, he picks a board game like every week, and it's a different one every week, right?" It's like, "Oh, what board game is he playing this week?" Well, I'll tell you. So, but what's interesting about it is, yeah, some of the games that I play, yeah, the balance is just not quite right. And so, yeah, you'll have overpowered options in the game, or if you really know the game well, you're always going to win, right? And so you want it balanced so that there are many ways to win, or many ways to get done what you want to get done, or the other one is everybody has to take the same path, and you effectively make that, something that everybody can work through. And so it's the same with video games, whether it's one player or many players, in the sense that, like, initially it seems like a lot of the games I play, you're just kind of grinding easier levels, but there's some incentive for you to do that. But after a while it gets hard, and then it's the different kind of challenge that draws you in. And so, yeah, but that's more, I think you play test it, you get other people to play test it and things like that, as opposed to, hey, how do I program this? Well, the programming is probably pretty straightforward.
Yeah, that's always the hard part for me, finding the fun in it and actually making it fun and interesting. Coding it, I always say, is the easy part. At least I feel like for me, it's the easy part, just making the code and making the computer do the thing that I told it to do, just by saying like, oh, it's supposed to do these instructions, and then it'll do it. I just copy those instructions in, and then eventually they become part of my memory, and I type them in. And now I don't even do that. Now I just give it the variable name, and the AI kind of auto completes it for me as I start typing.
Oh, wow.
GitHub Copilot just goes in there and kind of auto completes 80% of my work anyway. So I just have to remember my variable names now. So yeah, it's pretty easy, but making it fun, I feel that is a totally separate task, and it's also a very separate job. It's generally a game designer job. But when you're an indie developer that's solo, then you have to do both of those jobs too. So you've got to kind of think, if you want to get into the game industry and you just want to do design, it's certainly an option. That's definitely one of the key jobs there. It doesn't pay as well as the programming and the engineering side, but it's a fun job, and it's very, very important to have in there. Otherwise, your game ends up looking awesome, the code runs great, and the game is boring and not fun, and nobody cares.
Right. So speaking of design, I guess there are two aspects to that, right? One of them is kind of what we're talking about with, striking the right balance and, having the right mechanics in the right place and stuff like that. One of the things that I ran into for a long time too was the kind of artwork part of it, right? Where I was going, look, I can't even draw a stick figure right. So, right, how am I going to get artwork that looks good? I mean, the podcast artwork, I pay for that, right? Because there's just no way, it's just not my skill set. And so if I'm not an artwork person, if I'm not a, make it all pretty and make it look right person, how do I work through that?
I am also not an art person. My art skills are really, really, really bad. I'm looking around at the little bit of drawing that I've done. And I had one of the same concerns. And I used to worry that like I needed to find an artist and stuff. But I found that for most things that I want to do, I can find the art for way cheaper or free online, either through different websites or through things like the Unity Asset Store. They have a huge selection of free stuff, and then like a just giant selection of art and other types of assets as well. There's some really interesting like tooling and things that you can add in, but there's a ton of art and cool effects, particle effects, characters, vehicles, all that kind of stuff that you can grab. And it's like, when I say cheap, it's relative to hiring an actual artist to do it, but they're insanely cheap compared to an artist. You're looking at like 100th of the cost of having somebody make this stuff yourself. You just go on there, especially if you grab a good deal on one of the packs. They have packs constantly. Humble Bundle also has packs on stuff. It's really easy. One of the things that I find a lot of people do when they start getting into game development, though, is they'll just grab tons and tons of these packs. They'll start to find all the things that are on sale. Like, they get 30 assets for $30 or something crazy. And they're like, oh, go grab that and go grab that. And they end up with a huge, huge bundle of things that kind of drive their game development for the next year.
I gotcha. No, that makes sense. I mean, yeah.
It's what I do. It's what I did, and what everybody I know has done. It's really, really hard to resist the urge because you go like, "Oh, look at that! I can get 20 new spaceships for only $30. Like those spaceships are awesome. I'm going to build a spaceship game now." And you go do that. But it's a lot of fun too, and it gets around the problem of not having art. Now, when you come to like building out your final professional game, you're probably going to want to have some custom art done for at least like your main characters. Some people want to do it for everything, but a lot of times it's just a little bit cost ineffective. And sometimes depending on the game, it may not make sense. If it's just a bunch of rocks and it's space stuff and all that, like having custom ones that have never been anywhere else doesn't really matter because nobody's going to know the difference. But for their main characters and things like that, a lot of time people will have that custom done. And for those, you can still have them done at I would say a reasonable price on places like Fiverr and Upwork. And you're looking at, anywhere from sub $100 to a couple $100 for a reasonable character or vehicle or something like that. That's custom to exactly what you want and animated up and does all the stuff. But for all the other things, we're talking, you're looking at maybe $10 per thing. Some of the things slightly more expensive, but you get bundles and get sales. You get stuff really, really cheap and get a ton of it. Because I'm a terrible artist.
I was going to ask about that too, and you kind of answered it was, well, won't your game look like everyone else's game? And it sounds like your primary elements where, you really focus on, a character or a vehicle or a whatever, right? Yeah, that it makes sense then that you could have those parts custom made, and then a Starfield's a Starfield, right? And I don't know that
in a building a lot of the time what makes things look different too isn't so much the art, it's the post-processing effects afterwards. So if you look at something like Borderlands, you look at that game without the post-processing on, the assets look totally different, right? And it's the same, you add post-process effects to any game and it's going to change the way that things look, and then you want to do a little bit of modification to make them all kind of look good together if you can, or have an artist or designer friend do it, which is usually what I do. I'm like, hey, I know some artists and some designers. Hey, I'll just call them up. Can you take a look at this? Tell me how to fix it, or maybe fix it for me. and a lot of the time they're really quick with it, and they know the differences or the things that'll make it look really nice. Especially the artists, they got that eye for it. Like, it just needs purple here. Like, oh, never would have thought of that.
Right. Yep, exactly. It feels and sounds totally doable. I'm looking forward to putting together some games. I'm just going to tell people right now, it looks like we're probably going to do the calls on Thursday mornings. I'm probably going to be doing them at, I got to look at my calendar because I can't remember if I was doing it at 9 or 10. I think I'm doing it at 9 a.m. Mountain Time. So that's 8 a.m. Pacific. It's going to be 11 a.m. Eastern Time. The reason I've been doing it in the morning is because it seems like about half the people that want to join any of the things I'm doing are in Europe. And if I do it past about 10 or 11 my time, it just starts getting into the evening for them. And so, so we're going to do it 9 a.m. Mountain Time. I'm going to do the first one starting next week. This is going to come out basically on the 18th of April. So we're looking at the week after. We're going to be doing that, and we'll do the first meetup, and we're just going to talk, right? I won't have an agenda. It's going to be, hey, this is how far I've gotten in the course. How far have you gotten? What are you struggling with? Here's what I'm struggling with. We'll help each other through. That's what it's going to look like, because I'm not the genius expert at this stuff. I'm learning just like you are, but Jason, if people want to pick up the course and follow along, what are we looking at there?
All you've got to do is go register at the site. It's on game.courses, and I'll give you the link with that code. But I think that your part about having the group to talk to is extremely important. It's one of the core things that I've seen successful developers in games and outside of games do all of the time. And it's one of the reasons that I put together a bunch of matchmaking in the past. I found that getting developers together means that they keep going with stuff. They get past their problems really quickly, and they don't end up stuck. They end up actually building and releasing games. So we're doing I'm doing some of my own like mastermind matchmaking stuff that I think is just ended. But we're also, I just wanted to really quickly mention having the Game Dev Guild conference coming up in May.
I know, I'm planning on going to it.
Yeah, good
I'm excited,
opportunity
dude.
to meet lots
Yeah.
of stuff. Yeah, I think that'll be fun. It's a good time to meet other developers too, and kind of talk through your game dev process and also get a bunch of cool free stuff. We got like a ridiculous amount of freebies that Andreas was able to put together. So I think that'll be cool. But overall, yeah, I mean, you just register, start going through the coursework. It's setups now so that you can go through kind of at your own pace as fast as you want, taking the quizzes. There are a lot of quizzes along the way to just test your knowledge, make sure that you're actually understanding things, that you're not just kind of skipping through and missing things, but also to point out things that are a little bit odd. So a couple semi-tricky questions in there. So get it, and then perhaps get it wrong the first time and have a good explanation of why. So go through all those and then get certification at the end. It's the process.
Nice.
There's also a Discord server where people are pretty active with chat, and then people also just constantly email me with questions. So I find that it's the easiest way to get any support. Just send me an email, let me know what you're running into, what questions you have, what you're unsure about, or just kind of curious about, and I try to get back to those almost right away.
Right. So I just want to clarify a couple of things. First off, for the course, you said game.courses. I think you gave me a link and a coupon code. If I remember, the coupon code was JavaScript 5.
Sounds right.
And it was for 20% off, I think, on the course.
I believe so.
All right. So I'm just going to put that out there. I'm giving away Jason's money. Sorry, Jason. I don't know if I got any kind of link or anything for the Game Dev Guild, and I was going to ask about that. Is there a way that people can get tickets to that?
Sure. So either at gamedevguild.com or I'm also going to put together a bundle for the course and conference pass. So if you happen to grab that before May 1st, you'll be able to get that at the game.courses site as well.
Okay. And same
use
coupon
that coupon code. Yeah, definitely use the coupon code.
All right. And just the other thing I wanted to clarify. So Game Dev Guild is completely online.
Yes.
So
completely online with an online expo hall, though. So it feels a lot like being in person. You can watch all the sessions. It's kind of nice. You watch all the sessions on one side, and then you can be, in your other window running around chatting with everybody in the expo hall when the session part gets to something that you're not really interested in. Run over and have a little conversation, and it's very easy to duck out of the conversations too. You can just turn your camera off. Hey, gotta go. Be right back. You don't have to slowly creep away from the chat or anything. And there's a lot of conversations going on, so it's fun. You can see where people are chatting. You can walk up. You don't have to have your camera on or your mic on, but you can walk up, have a chat with people, join in on the conversation, or just kind of listen in, see if it's something you're interested in, and move on to the next chat. If there are lots of like big groups and clusters of people having fun conversations and talking about different stuff. Even some of the sponsor booths that are there, they just get loaded up with people that are really interested in the things that they've got, like the Odin one especially. It's a super popular Unity tool. Everybody was crowding the Odin booth, and Unity is going to have 2 booths at this conference, so I expect that their booths will be pretty packed too, because they've got all the insider info. If you want to go ask them stuff that you can't normally get a hold of them and ask them, there's a good chance. Yeah.
So you said that there were giveaway or bonuses or stuff that you got as part of the ticket to the conference, right? It's not just I get to show up and listen to talks. What else do you get?
Yeah, there was a couple $1,000s worth of assets and free licenses: JetBrains Writer license, Odin license, Unity Pro license.
Oh, wow.
A ridiculous number of assets, free art, cool art packs that there's a big list of them on the page. I don't think I can even remember them all. There were, oh man, there's a hot reload one. There's a lot of stuff. It added up to a couple $1,000s in bonuses. My goal with it was that I really wanted the bonuses to feel somewhat like Microsoft Build. I mean, can't give everybody a new console that hasn't been released yet, but at least give them lots and lots of assets and game dev related things that they can actually use right away that are way more than the value of the ticket price as well. So it's like a extra, hey, I don't know. I always like going to conferences like that. It was always like one of my favorite things. Like, yeah, I want to go to this conference where I'm going to get a bunch of free stuff too. It's awesome. Get to talk to people and get free things. So,
but yeah, we'll put links in the show notes. Make it real easy for people to go if they want to get the bundle with the Game Dev Guild, or if they just want to take the course. You know, if you go to topenddevs.com/workshops, it'll show you when those meetings are, and tell you how to join. And yeah, we'll just make it real easy for people to get in and be part of the action. But I'll tell you, this is something. The more I talk about it, the more excited I am to do it. Right? I mean, I think it'd be really fun to just get some fun games out there, and see how it all comes together. Maybe do some dev-focused ones too.
One more thing I want to ask you and everybody else too. Do you think you're going to be able to resist the urge to start building business apps in Unity once you realize that you can do that as well, and just how easy it is? Because you can suddenly build like augmented reality, virtual reality, or 3D animated stuff, cool touchscreen things, interactive displays. My buddy did like the Super Bowl displays that they had at the actual Super Bowl, all in Unity. And I feel like a lot of the time when people start building games, they get in and they're like, oh, I'm building these games. Then I had an idea for work, and now I'm using Unity at work. And then they kind of make that switch over to do the enterprise stuff too, which is like probably, I don't know the exact percent, but I would guess around like a quarter of the Unity development. Do you think that that's a risk or a possibility? I mean, I think it's also a really good reason to learn it, but I'm just curious.
I hadn't really thought much about that. I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense in a couple of ways. One is, as you mentioned, like all the Super Bowl stuff and things like that. I didn't know they'd done it in Unity, but I mean, the math works out, right? Yeah. That's what it does. So
yeah.
I don't see why you wouldn't use Unity or, some other tool like it to do it. I mean, I could kind of see my way to that, where, you could build some kind of dashboard or, some other business experience or something like that.
Do you like museum interactive displays? There's really good use for it because you get nice visual effects and super fast responsiveness. And it's brain dead easy too.
And I don't want to commit to this, but the one thing that I've been flirting with for a while is doing something around computing history. And so, yeah, you mentioned the virtual museum. And yeah, it would be interesting, right, to have people be able to go in and virtually interact with like a Turing machine, or get into some of the other historical computing things, where you could actually interact with a computer as big as a room and try and even make it so that you're doing some of the programming style stuff to program, like you saw in Hidden Figures, right, where they were trying to figure out how to get them on the moon, right? And so you get in and you start making it do math.
Yeah, you start having fun with it. But you can also solve just a ton of business problems. Like
I could see a dashboard or
Well, and when you get into the virtual and augmented reality stuff, especially in the enterprise side and engineering, like the mechanical engineering, they're starting to really pull in a lot of that stuff to visualize and speed up processes.
You can see how things move. Yeah.
Or how to assemble things. I don't know what I'm allowed to talk about, so I got to be careful. But there's
it's fine.
Lots of different stuff. And I'm actually going to play with that Android Auto thing later on today in there. So I can put something into my car.
Well, and that's another one. I mean, you mentioned putting something into your car, and I've done all kinds of repairs on my car just because for me, it's relaxing. In fact, I'm wearing this nice Ruby Rogues sweatshirt, and I don't know if I can scoot back or stand up, but I've got these. I've worked on my car in this one, so you can see the stains on my from the grease from my 4-wheel drive on my truck. But anyway, what's interesting there is, I mean, you could, right? I go on YouTube all the time and watch how do I fix this aspect of my car, right? And I watch them basically pull all the pieces off. And sometimes you don't really get a great view with the camera, right? So you go watch another video, or, you get in and pull it apart and it's like, oh, that's what that's what I'm dealing with. And I can imagine that would be really handy, right? Hey, this comes apart like this, right? And you can actually, you can turn it or move around it or things like that. They actually
show it overlaid in real time, from your glasses, look down there and it shows the part, shows it coming out virtually, how it would come out. Anyway, it's going to happen eventually. It's just a matter of time. who figures it out first. But with all the new AI advancements in the last few months, I don't expect it's going to be too long, because they're going to have that object detection has gotten drastically better. It's going to be really easy to do those things. And then it's just a matter of visualizing them. And then doing that in Unity is a matter of dropping in the object. And like it's insanely simple. You don't have to do anything to render and show all that stuff with augmented reality and virtual reality. You literally drop an object and it just works.
And I remember, so we used to go to Microsoft Build and Microsoft Ignite for the podcast, right? And so they had their, what do they call their headset? I can't even remember.
The HoloLens.
HoloLens, yeah. And so anyway, they were always demoing that, right? And so they had, hey, this is how we set up virtual meetings in a virtual space, and here's how we would use it to teach a course. So the whole class has HoloLens on, and then I do the anatomical overlays for an anatomy class, right? And so, yeah, there's something for the hands-on, dissection, but at the same time, you can show people what they're actually going to see when they do the dissection. You can show them, how the human body works and how it goes together. And yeah, some of that stuff. And then, getting it to the point where I can look at my own knee or my own hand, and it can automate that stuff as an overlay on me, right? Or on the person next to me. Anyway, yeah.
Soon it'll be just in your glasses, automating it for everybody that you see. Walk up like, hey, look at that. Mr. Wood there, and I can see his bones. Like he's got an implant right there. And be like Iron Man. That's the plan. That's why I built Cortana. So,
Well, yeah. The other thing is doing it on your phone, because you talked about some of the AR stuff, and I don't think people realize often that your phone really is an AR device, right? It adds something. A lot. It doesn't even have to use your camera, right? It can detect things around you and then give you feedback, right? And so, all of that going into it, right? So you could point the camera, like you said, at your car, right? You don't have to have an Oculus or whatever and look at it. You can just point your camera at it.
Point your phone at it. If you happen to have the cool glasses, the Samsung glasses or the eyeglasses or whatever they are, then I would assume it would show up in there too. But you probably have
just
to
show
have
up on your screen.
Yeah.
And once it knows it's there, then it can use the accelerometer to say, okay, now you're pointing so many degrees away from it, and so we're going to show you this piece, right?
Yeah, I think it's cool. The tech is advancing fast. It's very exciting, but it's also very easy to get into because the tooling is just making it simpler and simpler.
Well, the other thing that occurs to me is that, like, a lot of the stuff that they did on the Super Bowl and things like that, it's not nearly as involved as I've got all these 8 zillion pieces of the app running through and around and, whatever each other, right? And so a lot of the business apps, it seems like it's pretty simple stuff, right? It's, hey, I'm going to give this kind of a readout. It's going to look like this. I may have to detect a handful of things, and then I'm going to give this kind of feedback on it, and, you're good to go.
Yeah, I feel like the business application side of Unity is actually easier, and there's more money in it. Like that enterprise side, there's more money there, and the problems that you're solving are generally easier, and they're almost always easier because they're single threaded and single user. Like generally with web and enterprise stuff, it's the multi-user, multi-threaded problem that makes it complicated, where it starts to scale up. And with these, it's almost always like you're running on a single device that's got dedicated hardware for running it, and you don't have to worry about that. It's like it gets much, much simpler, I think.
Cool.
And more exciting too, and flashy.
Well, and I hadn't even thought about doing like VR and AR. I was just thinking games on my phone and my computer, but that sounds like a lot of fun. So
yeah, it definitely is.
Cool. Well, I'm just going to kind of bring us back in. We'll have links in the show notes. It's game.courses, right?
Correct. And Game Dev Guild.
Yep. GameDevGuild.com. And so, if you want to get that's what I'm planning on doing is I'm just going to, make sure I have a ticket to the conference, make sure I have access to the course. I already have access to the course. But if you all want to hang out at the conference, that's awesome. If you want to come to the meetup on Thursdays, great. right? I'm just looking for people to kind of go through this journey with and, learn from each other. So yeah, go to those places, sign up for those things. If you let me know, then I'll make sure to keep an eye out for you at the Game Dev Guild. And if you sign up for the course, then let me know. And, I'll make sure that I email you and let you know exactly when that meetup is if you, for whatever reason, can't figure it out on the website. So
I'll have to make you a little couch or booth or something for the event too. Everybody can come find you on the
that'd be
expo
fun.
floor. Yeah.
Yeah.
A little podcast recording booth and shove everybody in. Pretty cool.
Yeah.
Or we'll theme it up as one. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thanks for jumping on, Jason. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, we're going to wrap it up here. Until next time, Max out.